Well, good morning to you, or good evening, depending on when you've stumbled onto the porch. Come on in out of the chill. The frost is still clinging to the window panes, looking like lace doilies that my mother used to starch and iron, and the house has that heavy, comfortable silence that only comes on the first day of the year. The coffee is hot, fresh from the percolator, black as a moonless night, and strong enough to wake up a statue. Pull up a chair. Don't mind the mess on the side table. I've got the black-eyed peas soaking for later. You know the rule. Eat poor on New Year's Day, eat rich the rest of the year. That's what they told us anyway. Today, I just want to sit here and talk to you about miracles. Now, I don't mean the parting of the Red Sea, and I don't mean seeing a man walk on the moon, though we saw that too eventually. I'm talking about a different kind of miracle, a small one. A miracle that happened inside a wooden box in a crowded storefront on a freezing January morning, exactly like this one, way back in 1954. It was the day the world, quite literally, changed color. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand the world I grew up in. Children today, my great-grandkids, they live in high definition. They have screens in their pockets that show a billion colors brighter than real life. If they want to see a tiger in the jungle or a reef in the ocean, they tap a glass square and boom, it's there, sharp enough to cut your finger on. But for us, for me, growing up in the early 50s, the world outside our front door was colorful, sure. The grass was green, the sky was blue, and my mother's lipstick was a shade of red you could spot from an airplane. But the world inside the house, the world of information, of news, of entertainment, that world was gray. We lived in grayscale. The newspapers were black and white. The movies we saw at the matinee were mostly black and white, unless it was a big fancy Technicolor musical. And the television, oh, the television, that was a small rounded square of flickering gray shadows. You have to remember what those early TV sets were like. They were furniture, big heavy mahogany cabinets that took up half the living room, and the screen itself was tiny, maybe 12 inches. We'd sit there, the whole family huddled together, squinting at these ghostly, snowy figures. If the weather was bad, the picture would roll. You'd have to get up and fiddle with the horizontal hold knob until the people stopped looking like they were being stretched through a wringer washer. We used our imaginations. We had to. When the announcer said a lady was wearing a beautiful emerald gown, we just had to take his word for it. To us, it was just a shade of dark gray. When they showed a field of flowers, it looked like a field of cotton balls. We filled in the blanks with our minds. But then came the rumors. It started in late 1953. My daddy came home from the hardware store one day with a look on his face like he'd seen a ghost. He said, "I heard talk down at O'Malley's. They say NBC is going to broadcast the Rose Parade in color. Real color." My mama just laughed. She was peeling potatoes at the sink. I can hear the sound of that peeler now. Shh, shh, shh. She didn't look up. She said, "Frank, don't be foolish. How can they send color through the air? It's just radio waves. You can't spray paint a radio wave." That was the logic back then. It seemed impossible. It seemed like magic. And honestly, most people thought it was a hoax. Or if it wasn't a hoax, it was a gimmick that would never work. But the date was set. January 1st, 1954. The Tournament of Roses Parade in Pasadena, California. Now, we didn't have a color TV. Nobody did. A color set back then cost about $1,000. In 1954, you could buy a brand new car for $1,000. But Mr. O'Malley, who owned the appliance shop on Main Street, he had connections. He had gotten his hands on a prototype, an RCA model that looked more like a scientific instrument than a TV. He put a sign in the window. See the future today. Color broadcast. Jan 1, 10 a.m. I was a boy then, just young enough to believe in magic and just old enough to want to see how the trick was done. I begged my father to take me. It took some doing. New Year's Day was for football and napping, but he was curious too. I remember walking down Main Street that morning. It was bitter cold. The snow was piled up in dirty mounds along the curb, gray and gritty with coal dust. That's an important detail, folks. The whole town felt gray that morning. The sky was that flat sheet of steel wool clouds. The pavement was gray. Our heavy wool coats were navy or charcoal. It was a monochrome world. When we got to O'Malley's, the crowd was already spilling out onto the sidewalk. Men in fedoras, women with scarves tied under their chins, kids shoving their way to the front. It smelled like wet wool, stale pipe tobacco, and anticipation. Mr. O'Malley had the set placed high up on a wooden crate in the center of the showroom, draped in a velvet cloth like he was about to unveil a statue. "All right, folks, all right, settle down," he shouted, waving his hands. "We're getting the signal from the relay tower." The room went dead silent. You could hear the radiator clanking in the corner. He turned the big knob. Click! The screen hummed. That high-pitched whine that old TVs used to make. I can still hear it in my left ear sometimes. The picture tube warmed up, glowing with that familiar electric fuzz. At first, it was just the NBC Peacock logo. But it wasn't the black outline we were used to. It had feathers, blue feathers, green feathers, a beak of bright, sharp yellow. A gasp went through that room. I'm telling you, it was a physical sound, like all the air was sucked out of the shop at once. "It's a trick," a man behind me whispered. "They put a colored gel over the screen." But then the broadcast cut to the parade in Pasadena. Now, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine seeing television your whole life as a muddy, snowy window. And then suddenly, someone wipes the glass clean. The screen exploded. There was a marching band coming down the street. The uniforms weren't gray. They were a deep, regal scarlet with gold braiding that seemed to sparkle. The sky behind them wasn't white static. It was a piercing, impossible California blue. And then came the floats. Oh, the floats. There was one covered entirely in marigolds, thousands and thousands of them. On a black and white set, that would have been a light gray blob. But on this screen, it was orange. It was a burning, vibrant sunset orange that radiated heat. I stood there, pressed against the glass of a display case, with my mouth hanging open. I forgot about the cold. I forgot about my wet socks. I was staring at a miracle. The camera zoomed in on the Rose Queen. She was waving, sitting on a throne of white carnations, and she held a bouquet of roses. Pink. Roses. That's the color I remember most vividly. Pink. It's a funny thing to get emotional about, isn't it? A color. But you have to understand, we had never seen pink on a screen before. We had seen black, white, and 40 shades of gray. But this delicate, soft, petal pink, it felt like the TV was breathing. It felt alive. My father, who was a practical man, a man who didn't believe in nonsense, put his hand on my shoulder. I looked up at him, expecting him to explain the trick. expecting him to tell me how the wires were painted or how the glass was tinted. But he just stared at that screen, his eyes wide, reflecting the tiny, colorful image. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. "It's real." We watched the whole thing. For an hour nobody moved, nobody left the store. Strangers were smiling at each other, pointing at the screen saying, "Look at that green! Look at the red on that fire engine!" We were united by the sheer spectacle of it. When the parade ended and the broadcast cut to commercial, the spell broke. We shuffled back out into the cold January air. I remember stepping onto the sidewalk and looking around. The street was the same. The dirty snow was still there. The gray sky was still hanging low. But something had changed in me. I looked at the red brick of the post office, and I really saw it. I saw the rusty orange of the fire hydrant. I saw the yellow taxicab waiting at the light. It was like my eyes had been retrained. The box in the window had reminded me that the world was full of color if we just bothered to look at it. We walked home in silence. When we got to the kitchen, my mama was serving the black-eyed peas and collard greens. "Well?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Was it a hoax?" My daddy sat down at the table. He looked at the bowl of greens, that deep, dark, earthy green of the collards. He looked at the ham hock, pink and salty. He looked at the cornbread, golden yellow. "No, Martha," he said softly. "It wasn't a hoax. It was beautiful." It took another 10 years before we actually bought a color TV for our own house. They were too expensive, and frankly, my daddy said the black and white set worked just fine for the news. But I never forgot that morning. We live in a time now where miracles are cheap. We carry the whole world in our pockets. We can watch a parade in 8K resolution while riding the bus. We don't have to gather in a cold appliance store with our neighbors to share a moment of wonder. And sometimes I think that's a shame, because that morning we weren't just watching a parade. We were watching the future arrive. We were watching the gray clouds of the post-war years lift just a little bit to reveal a future that was bright and vibrant and full of promise. So today, on this first day of a new year, I want you to do something for me. I want you to look around your own living room, look at the colors, really look at them. The blue of your favorite mug, the brown of the wood floor, the green of that house plant you're trying to keep alive. Don't take them for granted. God painted this world with a very expensive brush, folks. He didn't skimp on the pigments. And even if your life feels a little gray right now, maybe you're lonely. Maybe you're worried about the bills. Maybe the winter feels like it's never going to end. Just remember that the color is there. Sometimes you just need to adjust the signal to see it. The sun is going to come out. The roses are going to bloom again. And the picture's going to clear up. I promise you that. Well, look at me rambling on. The black-eyed peas are starting to smell ready, and if I don't eat them soon, I won't have my luck for the year. And at my age, I need all the luck I can get. You folks take care of yourselves today. Be good to each other. Share a meal if you can. And keep your eyes open for the miracles. They're usually right there in the living room, hiding in plain sight. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and give you a year full of color. Happy New Year, everyone.